and welcome or welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle, the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode of a series, the pilot, and then use it to decide if we should watch the entire series. I literally cannot believe that we are entering the final quarter of 2024, but at least with a new month comes a whole host of new possible pilots to review. So I will be getting into what those hopeful watches will be later on in the episode, because on this episode of The Pilot Principle, we will be taking a look at episode 1 of ITV1's new biographical drama series, Joan. The series synopsis for Joan tells us, inspired by Joan Hannington's fascinating life, the show charts her incredible rags to riches story as she transforms from a penniless single mother to an accomplished jewel thief. Not gonna lie, that's a fantastic series summary. I feel like whoever wrote that needs to write my origin story, because yeah, I'm into that. Rags to riches, penniless to accomplished, jewel thief. It's just got all the trigger words. Yeah, totally here for it. Now, before we get into talking about the pilot episode itself in a bit more detail, let's have a rapid fire look at the credits. The pilot is titled Episode 1, and the synopsis for the pilot tells us that a penniless mother makes an impulsive decision in the jewellery shop where she works and is propelled into a different world. Yeah, I think that sums things up quite nicely. So we've got an episode length of 49 minutes and a series length of 6 episodes. So Joan is out on ITV1 and ITVX in the UK, and I do believe it is coming out on Hulu over in the States. The pilot episode, and possibly the entire series, was written by the series creator, Anna Simon, who also wrote the TV adaptation of The Essex Serpent, which I didn't read. I know, right? Because I do so much reading. I actually did not read that book. And Simon also wrote the BBC series Mrs. Wilson, which she worked on with the pilot director, Richard Laxton, who also directed The Thief, His Wife and The Canoe. I have seen Mrs. Wilson and I did really enjoy it. I think it's a 3-part series that came out on BBC One a few years ago. A very short cast list to take a look at, starting with Sophie Turner, who plays the titular character of Joan. Most of us know Turner from starring in Game of Thrones as Sansa Stark. However, she did also play Jean Grey in X-Men Dark Phoenix, which, you know what, I don't actually think I saw. I didn't hear good things, to be honest with you, and I just didn't. But you know what? Maybe I'll add it to the list. Beyond that, she has starred in a few bits here and there that I haven't seen, like the series The Staircase. And finally, on a very short cast list, we have Frank Delane, who plays the character Boyce. And is it just me, or does anyone else think that Delane looks like a young Johnny Depp? If you're not quite sure who I'm talking about, Delane has recently starred in the Disney Plus series Renegade Nell, and he also starred in The Essex Serpent, so clearly there's some sort of keeping it in the family thing going on here. Good for them. And he played a young Tom Riddle in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. So far so good, and in terms of what made me want to watch Joan in the first place, honestly, ITV can be a bit hit and miss, but I really enjoyed the police drama series after the flood that aired earlier this year. So, I'm just trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what ITV is doing. And of course, Sophie Turner was a big draw because I haven't seen her in anything good. No offence, Ms. Turner, but maybe this will change things. And you know what? I'm a sucker. I'm an absolute sucker for a female lead character that isn't all good. So those were the main things that drew me to watching Joan in the first place. One last teeny tiny thing before we get into talking about the pilot episode. If you have made it this far and you like what you're hearing, make sure you're following. And make sure that you've shared this podcast with a fellow TV addicts with far too little time on their hands who kind of just needs to know what to watch and what to not bother watching. Muchas gracias. Let's get into talking about the first 10 minutes of the pilot episode of Joan. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, the first 10 minutes should, by design, keep us, the audience, invested enough to watch the entire episode. So the first 10 minutes goes like this. We are in London in 1985 and we are in a large, messy room and we track slowly towards a woman who sits at a dressing table with her scarred back towards us. This is Joan and we watch as she does her makeup, she puts on a wig and some jewellery, and while she does so, we spot a hat box full of cash. The phone rings and when Joan answers, it's with a posh American accent, but off the phone she switches to Cockney. She walks out of the hotel in a large fur coat and into the back of a chauffeur-driven car. And then we are hit with the title card, Joan. Coming off of this, we are 4 months earlier by the Kent coast and we meet a blonde and less bougie looking Joan and her daughter Kelly, who live above a Chinese takeaway shop. It's Joan's birthday and Gary, her baby daddy, drives her to work in a brand new sports car and gives her a fur coat for her birthday. Joan questions where he got all the stuff, but Gary doesn't answer and just zooms away. When we next see Gary, it's the next morning and he turns up at Joan's house and starts frantically packing a bag before disappearing and warning Joan to keep her mouth shut. Then, that night, 2 men appear in Joan's house demanding to know where Gary is. One of them hits Joan and puts a gun in her mouth before telling her, if Gary's not back by morning, someone's getting shot. And we believe him too, and that is about the 11-minute mark. As an intro, I would say that worked really well. We had a great opening wide shot that allowed our eyes to rove around the screen, trying to find clues about the woman who has her back to us. And then from there, we then get a slice of normal life, which again sets the stage for our main character. So we know what their life is like before everything changes. Not gonna lie, it does always annoy me when the gangsters go for the family of a scumbag. He doesn't care about them. He's literally a scumbag. Like, if you shot Joan and her kid, he would not care. He would not feel any guilt. But that's just a side note. So let's move on to talking about the main characters. Well, actually, character singular. So we are focusing today on Joan. So Joan is a struggling single mum who has been put in a bad situation and is doing her very best to keep her daughter safe. We see this when, after the whole incident with the man in her room and the gun to the mouth, she manages to escape with her kid Kelly and leaves her with social services to take care of, even though we learn that Joan herself has had bad experience in the care system. So this really emphasizes how desperate she is, and it shows that she's the kind of person who will do whatever is necessary to keep the people that she loves safe. We know that what Joan really wants is money, but not in a greedy sense. She wants money in order to build a better life for herself and her daughter away from the Kent coast and whatever troubles that Gary has brought to her doorstep. But what Joan really needs is stability. And yes, money can offer stability, but the two are very, very different. Now, in the beginning, in those first 10 minutes, the Joan we meet is very carefree, almost childlike, until someone sticks a gun in her mouth. And then from that point, Joan begins her metamorphosis. She is fighting for better, to have control of her life because it was nearly taken from her by the gangster because of someone else. Joan heads up to London from the Kent coast to spend some time with her sister, who, it's not that she doesn't get along with, let's just say they're just very different siblings. When she gets up to London, she has a haircut and a change of wardrobe, which I think are great visuals for this metamorphosis that she's going through. And it's quite interesting because the clothes that she wears, that she borrows from her sister, don't quite fit. It almost looks like it's costume, which is a great callback to the start of the episode. Also, not gonna lie to you, love the bob. I absolutely love the bob. Kind of now want to have a blonde bob. Don't think it will quite work for me, but I'm not going to lie, she's making me heavily consider it. Now, in terms of character dynamics, we see Joan interact with numerous people over the course of the pilot episode. So her older sister, whose name I don't really recall, Betty? No, I've just made that up. Don't believe me, her sister's name is not Betty, but she does have an older sister who owns a hair salon. And with her older sister, again, it's not that the two don't get along. I think her older sister is just stable and responsible, and Joan is just basically a reckless little sister, but not in a bad way. I think, sibling dynamics, what are you going to do? The next version we see of Joan is one that is remorseful as she stands in front of a judge because she stole a car and pleads not to be sent to prison or to have this go on her record or anything like that, so that she doesn't lose custody of her kid. We also meet a Joan who is all too aware of men and the world that she lives in. And this becomes apparent when she gets a job at a jeweler's and her boss starts making unwanted advances towards her. And the way she deals with it, almost not quite shrugging it off, but she basically gets up and quits and is like, oh, here we go again. And there's something sad with the way she almost expects it to happen and just knows to get up and walk away. She's not surprised by it in the slightest. And you're just wondering what kind of life Joan's led. And the final interaction that we have to comment on is her interaction with Boyce, who she meets towards the end of the episode. And with Boyce, she's a little bit standoffish, but she's also a little bit banterous. And this is a completely different and more natural interaction with a man that we've seen Joan have throughout the course of the episode. What I'm trying to get at is that Joan is clearly good at being different people for different reasons. She slips in and out of all of these different versions of herself: little sister, repentant citizen, and a woman who's just fed up. In terms of my predictions for Joan throughout the series, she is definitely impulsive, which could work in her favour, but something tells me it also could not. She wants a better life for her and her daughter, but she isn't patient enough to wait for that to happen. For example, the reason she gets arrested is because she steals a car because her sister says she can't take the day off work to go and see her daughter, because she didn't ask to take the day off of work because it was going to be busy the day that she wanted to take. And you watch this play out and think, if she had just called social services back and rescheduled, then she never would have had to steal the car in the first place, etc., etc. If she had just been patient, then she wouldn't have been in the situation where her sister basically ended up asking her to find another job, and then she ended up working at a jeweler's, etc., etc. It almost seems like Joan is all about that instant gratification. Yes, life hasn't always been kind to Joan from what we can ascertain from her past and the things that she says and the things that we see. And so it seems that instead of waiting for life to hurt her, Joan has decided to take control of the narrative. Which, low-key, high-key, I kind of respect. And now it is time for a quick interlude to see what film and TV has been looking like beyond the pilot principle. And as usual, we're going to start with talking about books. So I finished reading The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. And you know what? A lot of people really like this book. And it's not that I didn't like it. I just think it was very predictable and very vanilla. And there was no point in which I was worried about anything that was going to happen. After reading the first 100-ish pages, I knew exactly how it would end. So there was no jeopardy for me reading it. And if it wasn't for like the last 50 to 75 pages, I probably would have rated it 2 stars. But those last 100 pages redeemed itself slightly. So I think I'll bump this up to 3 stars. My next read is going to be Burnham Wood by, I want to say Eleanor Canton? Possibly made that up, but I feel like I'm not too far off. I actually have no idea what this book is about, but somebody recommended it to me about 2 years ago, and I have a copy, and I think that's what I'm going to do next, because otherwise I don't know what book mood I'm in. I don't know if it's sci-fi season, or if it's spooky gothic book season, or if it's time for some teen thrillers, or is it time to get into my fantasies? Not quite sure. So for now, Burnham Wood by Eleanor Canton is next. In terms of film, I watched some pretty decent movies actually this week. The first movie I watched was The English Patient, which is a long-ass movie, and I watched this one over on Netflix. However, I believe it's now gone from Netflix because one of the reasons I watched this is because it was leaving at the end of September and now we're in October, so oops. But I really enjoyed this one. It was a bit of a slow start, wasn't quite sure where it was going, but yeah, it's quite an epic love story, and the characters really just grew on me because at the beginning I was like, what are you guys all doing in the desert? But I liked the way it led up to the war and the relationship between the two main characters, and there was just this beautiful circularity between the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie that just chef's kiss. I also rewatched Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 Joe Wright version, obviously the best version, at me if you want. And that was great. That's also leaving Netflix. So I just tried to watch it whenever it comes on, and just a nice cozy watch. Just quoted the entire, or I should say misquoted, the entire movie. So that was a lot of fun. And then I actually left the house to go to the cinema, where I did a double bill, starting with The Outrun, which is the Saoirse Ronan movie based on a true story. And that was really good. It was just, it's quite hard for me to talk about movies when I've recently just seen them, but I enjoyed The Outrun. It was fresh and it gave me something that I feel like has been missing from British cinema specifically in a little while. So, really good story, really well acted. I just feel like running away to the Orkneys now to finally breathe. And finally, I did in fact watch the highly anticipated question mark movie Megalopolis. Like, okay, it's quite hard to get into what this movie is or what this movie is supposed to be, but if I could summarize, I would say that this is a Hollywood version of an experimental movie, and if you're going to watch it, you should walk into it with that mentality. It's about nothing, but I think it's supposed to be about a lot of things in the subtext. Arguably, I haven't rated this one yet, but I was thinking about it in comparison to Madam Web, which was an awful movie, probably the worst movie I watched this year. But the difference is, I think I would rate Megalopolis higher than I would rate Madam Web. And that's because Madam Web was supposed to be something. It was supposed to be a superhero movie. And in that, it failed. Whereas Megalopolis was supposed to be this personal filmic journey, specifically from the mind of Francis Ford Coppola, and in that sense, I guess it did its job. And that's all I'm going to say on that. And finally, in TV land, I watched a couple of first-ish episodes of things, actually. So I watched the first episode of Sherwood Series 2. That was good. I'll continue. I also watched the first episode of The Penguin, which I did enjoy. But you know what? I always find it hard when things are super hyped. And I'm like, did I really like this, or do I like this because everybody is saying that I should like this, and if I say I don't like this, then everyone will think that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's hard to say, but I always just say what I think, and I thought it was a good pilot, a solid pilot episode. If I was to give it a pilot score, it might actually be a 4.5 to 5 out of 5. And the final thing that I watched was Nobody Wants This on Netflix. Now, I haven't watched all of it. I've only watched the first 2 episodes, and when I tell you that I'm already like giggling and like kicking my feet up in the air and just pretending I'm on a 90s phone and like twirling the cord, like it's just so, yeah, it's just so sweet and wholesome and romantic and cute. And as we know, I'm a massive Veronica Mars fan, aka Kristen Bell, and of course we've got Seth Cohen from the OC. Oh god, what's his real name? That's terrible. Adam Brody, yes. So it's just also giving a little bit of nostalgia, and I'm here for it. Can't wait to see how the rest of the series plays out. Okay, I know we need to get back into the episode, but to round it up, here is what I'm thinking is to come later on this month on the pilot principle. Okay, let's just say that these are the shows that are on my radar, and as you know, I can't really be trusted. I can't really be trusted because who knows what I will actually end up reviewing. But here's what's on my radar. So we've got Sweet Pea, which is coming out on Sky, and I believe that's a comedy drama thriller thingy, and this one is starring that main chick from Fallout. And then on the list is Rivals, which is over on Disney Plus, and that's got David Tennant and the guy I'm so bad with names, the guy who played Poldark. And then I'm thinking I might do Show Trial Series 2. I'm not sure because I don't know if it's an anthology yet or if it's a continuation from Series 1. I'm just going to see how it goes. And finally, Tyler Perry's Beauty in the Black on Netflix. No idea what the heck that is about, but I know Tyler Perry series and films can just be a bit ridiculous, and I actually haven't seen any of them, so I figured, if there's a new one out, why the F not? Disclaimer is also out on Apple TV, but I don't have Apple TV. However, it is playing at the London Film Festival, so if I can get tickets to that, I might watch that and do a little sneaky little review. So if you want a pilot review of any of those shows in particular, do let me know and I will do my utmost best to make it happen because, yeah, who the F knows? Okay, let's get back to scrutinising the pilot episode of Joan. Fast forwarding all the way to the end of episode Hook, we watch as Joan steals some loose diamonds from the jeweller where she works. Which, Not gonna lie to you, based on the situation in which she chose to steal them, we don't feel too mad at her for making that particular life choice. After stealing said diamonds, she ends up meeting an antiques dealer named Boyce, which kind of kismet. Now, he does agree to fence her stolen goods for her, and in return, Joan agrees to do some work for him. And then it's great because the music starts playing and Boyce is like, I think that you and I are going to get along, Joan. And Joan's like, it's just work. It's just one job. If you rip me off, I'll fucking kill you. And he's like, yeah, fair enough. Same. And in terms of where we are at the end of episode, it does make sense from where we began because Joan was never really on the straight and narrow, let's face it. I mean, even if it was just by association with Gary, she knew that he was into some dodgy shit. And at least now she's in the driving seat. But the goal is still the same: get her kid back by any means necessary. Now, in terms of the serial arc, we will, of course, at some point circle back to how the pilot episode began. So, Joan being in this hotel room, donning a wig, pretending to be a posh American. And I think that really speaks to the series overall, and that's watching as Joan perfects the life of a jewel thief. The second thing that we're going to see happen over the course of the series is watching as Joan and Boyce's relationship develop and watch as they eventually get married. Now, how do I know they're going to get married? Well, because the antique store that Joan walks into says Hannington's Antiques. And as we know, this is based on the real life story of Joan Hannington. So, 2 plus 2, 4. In terms of my predictions for the series, well, I think that Joan will get her daughter back and she'll pay less attention to her. No, do you know what? I think she's going to leave her daughter where she is because that's going to be the best thing for her, especially if she's going to start going down this life of crime. I also do think that someone's going to die, but 9 times out of 10, depending on what I watch, I always think that somebody's going to die. And of course, eventually, Joan is going to get caught. Now, of course, the question is whether she gets caught this series, if this is going to be a limited, or if she gets caught next series, if they're going to drag this out to series 2 and beyond. Time will tell. That's, of course, if you decide to watch beyond the pilot. Now, in terms of what I think made the pilot episode strong, I do think that we really understand and see Joan's transformation throughout the course of the episode. And we also see how well she assimilates, sort of from working at a club to working in a salon to working in a jewellery store. And even the way that she got the job in the jewellery store because she was sat on a bench and heard 2 posh women talking about going to buy jewellery in Mayfair. And she decided to go to the store that they were talking about and she put on their accent to ask about jewels and jewellery to learn everything she needed to then go to her interview to get the job at the jeweller's where she eventually stole her first set of diamonds. So yeah, we really see the markers of Joan's characteristics and personality sort of playing out throughout the course of the episode. And finally, on that point, like the idea of Joan and jewellery didn't feel out of the blue because it had been planted from the very beginning. We watch when she leaves Kelly with social services and she passes on a ring that Joan's own mother gave to her. So really good seeds being planted throughout the entirety of the pilot episode. Now, on the flippity flip side, in terms of things that I think made the pilot episode relatively poor, I'm always a bit hit and miss about intros that start in the future before we then return to the past present, such as in the instance of Joan, where we don't come back to it. It teases us, but it doesn't add any value to the plot. It's just to hook us in. And so we might as well have just started in Kent 4 months ago and that be the beginning and leave all this other London business for it to happen chronologically. I think the pilot episode did feel a bit squashed as Joan goes from place to place to place to place and transformation to transformation over the course of the 49-minute episode. And so getting back a few of those early minutes would have given the pilot episode room to breathe. Now, the second thing that I didn't quite like about the pilot episode is Gary, not just because he is a flaming douchebag, but basically Gary owes money to gangsters as a plot point, which was just laughably weak. I mean, his entire existence was a narrative device, which, yes, clever, but also just made him kind of irrelevant as a character, especially as he is Joan's baby daddy, and I feel like he should have a little bit more weight and meaning and depth to him, as opposed to just turning up and just basically being a harbinger of bad news. So those are a few specific good pilot points and bad pilot points. But in terms of what I personally liked within the pilot episode, the cinematography. There were some fantastic frames over the course of the episode, starting with that opening wide shot, which really drew you into the episode and into the intrigue of what was happening and who this woman was. There's another fantastic frame when Joan is in prison after stealing a car and the cell door shuts on her and she is sat down on her bed, but it's framed perfectly within the peephole. Ugh, beautiful. And then finally, when Joan is working at the jeweller's, she is modelling an expensive piece of jewellery for a customer, and the camera ever so subtly turns to see her adulation in the mirror, and she looks like a hungry dragon waiting to start their hoard. And just the way the framing worked, we could see her looking at herself in the mirror, but then her boss was watching her watch herself and already being like, can I trust this bitch? Is she gonna steal my jewels? Like, it was just, yeah, some really fantastic framing work and just good cinematography all around. And now it is time to ask yourself a question. Will you be continuing with Joan? So based on all of the above, here is why I think that Joan might be for you. If you like your stories with a badass female lead, then yeah, you might like Joan. If you want to know a little unique piece of British history, I don't know if it can technically be called history, but it did happen in the past and I'm not a historian, so let's just go with it. So yes, if you want a unique piece of British history, then I think maybe you should give Joan a chance, because I mean the only British Joan I know is Joan Bakewell. So it'll be good to add another Joan to the list. And finally, I would say that you might just want to sit down and settle in for Joan, because it's a light, easy watch, and sometimes we just need those in our lives. On the flippity flip side, here are some reasons why a Joan might not be for you. If you know the true story of Joan Hannington and you hate drama adaptations of true events, then obviously just skip this one, dude. And finally, if you like your shows just a little bit more gripping, Joan is interesting. I think it's an interesting story, but it's not the most tantalizing. It's a little bit jumpy narrative wise, because Joan really lives a life in the 2 or 3 weeks that we get to know her. So it's a bit all over the place, but without that sort of frantic energy. And if you prefer your dramas a little bit more on the action side, as opposed to just the simplistic storytelling side, then you might not want to continue with Joan. It's hard to say though, because I mean, she's going to be a jewel thief, so times for anxiety could possibly be on the horizon. Now, in terms of a pilot score, I will be giving Joan a 3 out of 5, because overall it is a really good setup and we get to understand and, dare I say, care about Joan. However, it doesn't really go beyond the basics. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's just a very standard pilot episode. Impartiality aside, based on the reasons above and biasedly taking into account the story of Joan, a woman I knew nothing of, and the fact that I'm all for strong, independent, morally grey female protagonists, I think, sure, why not? Let's throw another series log on the ever-burning flames of things to watch. Or some such metaphor. Okay, thank you for joining me this week. Let me know if you think I am making a colossal mistake on my decision to continue with Joan, and what you are going to do over on Instagram and Twitter at Pilot Principle. And of course, make sure you are following the podcast itself if you are interested in this month's possible let me not make promises that I may or may not keep, but the possible upcoming episodes. We're talking Rivals, Beauty in the Black, Sweet Pea, and whatever else tickles our fancy. Let's just see what happens. So I will catch you in the next episode. Aww.